Roque Seps on this beautiful Friday, July 8th. As always, we have some great content. I'll let Pete introduce our guest a little bit more in depth here in a moment. But again, we bring on topics and relevant information to help us in our everyday lives of being code enforcement officers, building officials, fire officials, you name it. These resources are for all of us. So again, with that great guest, we're going to talk a little bit about creating neighborhood law programs. And we have an awesome guest, Mr. Ryan Griffith, who is an attorney and associate receiver at the Bay Area Receivership Group. And again, I'll let Pete go into a little bit more detail, but good morning, Ryan. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Great. Okay. We're happy to have you on with us.
Happy to be here.
So for those who have never met Ryan, Ryan was actually the Solano Young Lawyer of 2013. He still has that baby face. but yeah, I met Ryan a couple, I think maybe like a year ago, like in person. I mean, I follow him on LinkedIn and social media, but I actually met him at the California League of Cities, and we talked about receiverships and depth. So it's always good to get somebody that we actually met and actually bring them onto the show. And, you know, one of the reasons that we tend to bring attorneys on here is so they can kind of explain and simplify what these neighborhood law programs, for example, are. And then we'll get into some other more technical terms and to kind of make it a little bit more palatable for us, you know, the viewer out there. So, well, with that, Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into being an attorney? Because I don't know if you were arguing back in grade school and you said, hey, I can do this for a living. So.
Well, I actually wanted to be a police officer, to be honest, when I first started. But then I took the LSAT. I ended up going to law school, and I just really liked it. But I never in a million years thought I would be a lawyer, to be honest. But I like it. And then my first job out of law school was with the Vallejo City Attorney's Office. And they were doing kind of a pilot program. Oakland had done it too, but Vallejo was, I believe, the second one to do these neighborhood law programs because – for those of you who aren't familiar, Vallejo is a city of about 100,000 people, and it was one of the largest cities to go bankrupt at the time. So it had all kinds of code enforcement issues, and they just said, let's hire 2 lawyers right out of law school because, honestly, they were so overwhelmed with other stuff that code enforcement was just on the back burner. And code enforcement, and I think this is a good thing for neighborhood law programs to work with code enforcement because it's kind of, from what I've noticed working with cities, a lot of times the city attorney's office and code don't always communicate perfectly. And these neighborhood law programs are more to basically serve code enforcement and really, because I think a lot of code enforcements have heard the term receivership, heard the term drug abatement, all these different things you can do, but you need someone to get it across the finish line. And that's really what neighborhood law programs do. And that was my first job out of law school. I didn't even know what receivership was. I went to a CLE with Jones and Mayer. It's a law firm in California. I think Amanda Pope works there. She was a guest here. And I just learned about receivership, and that was kind of my bread and butter, but there's different remedies. That's the one I thought was best for the situation. And we ended up doing like 50, and our relationship with code enforcement and police like really improved because I think a lot of times attorneys get focused on other things. And public safety, and particularly code enforcement, gets on the back burner, and that's where neighborhood law programs come in to solve that problem.
Yeah, and we see a lot of times where, you know, and it's funny that Vallejo used the untouchable. You ever watch the movie Untouchable? They picked you right out of the tree instead of the barrel. Awesome. But, you know, and we do see this, you know, I'm working with a lot of jurisdictions nowadays. And one of the things that we see is people don't use these remedies. You know, I see that people don't talk to their attorneys. They don't get interpretations. And, you know, a lot of these code officers really never get that, you know, get a little bit of education on what a receivership is or what it entails, or, you know, posting a property. You know, sometimes I've seen jurisdictions where they'll post the property with a red tag, but never follow up. They just post a red tag saying, hey, you can't be in here. Well, that's fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, you have to give proper due process and legal noticing in order for a receivership to be effective. So, you know, those are kind of things that we see. And, you know, and going into receiver, what is a receivership for those that don't know?
Sure. So receivership is really a way to deal with those major nuisance properties. Like you said, a lot of times, 95% of the time you red tag a building or give a citation, the person's going to respond and do something. But, about 5% of the time, a real just easy explanation is if an owner dies without any children, you can issue all the red tags you want. Nothing's going to change, they're not there. And that's where a receiver can be appointed the court appoints a receiver to take control of the property, and they can rehab it and sell it and get it back into productive use. And then a lot of the proceeds are kept in probate. If some heir ever pops up somewhere, they can collect it. But I think that's the most classic example with a dead owner. You can see where that would come up. You could go there all day and put red tags on the building. What's going to happen? And there's like issues with a bank won't foreclose. Receivership can deal with that. But in essence, it's just a way for the court to take over a property. It's similar to eminent domain, except the city doesn't pay for it. The city doesn't pay. And in fact, a lot of times gets their attorney's fees and enforcement costs back. It's very narrow. And it just fixes these major nuisance properties. And it has to be a truly bad property to go into receivership. It can't just be like the grass isn't cut,
Right.
Yeah.
And reminding our guests, and thank you, Miss Jennifer, she said that's very true. It's difficult to, find these programs and utilize them. But reminding our guests, ultimately going back to what your code says, what your charter says, what the intent is behind what your elected officials want. So, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of all of this, but, we're going to get into your article that talks about bringing other municipalities, other states in, but really from that perspective, Jennifer's perspective, my perspective, others' perspective, we may hear the words and know that receiverships exist, but what is your best advice for moving from knowing that the words exist to being able to utilize that, program?
Yeah, and that's exactly one of the major issues I see is like, yeah, you hear it and you're like, oh, it sounds great, we should do it. But it's not, you don't just snap your fingers and get it done. And that's where I think the neighborhood law programs, which a couple cities are starting to do, are so important because, to be honest, it's not the most legally complicated stuff to do. It's voluminous and it's really good for like young lawyers to get to do. And that's what I did. I was like, okay, this is great learning experience for me. It's still legal work, but it's not, a $50 million police brutality lawsuit or something. It's like, okay, it's a great place to start. And like these neighborhood law programs can really help explain, and they really want to work with code enforcement. I feel like a lot of times this is just my interpretation. A lot of code enforcement officers kind of feel neglected by their city attorney or feel not that comfortable asking. And the city attorney a lot of times isn't that responsive, like, well, we'll deal with it. And it just gets on the back burner. And I think neighborhood law programs, it's young lawyers right out of law school and just focus on this one issue because every city has these code enforcement issues. They're all there and they learn how to do it. And that's really the best way, I think, if you can get these programs. If you can't do that, read articles, maybe explain, send my article to the city attorney's office if you think there's a problem property, and I kind of explained the legality of it for the city attorney to understand a little better.
Yeah, and that's oops, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
No. I've caught myself having to educate not only the public but actually judges. Like we go to the court and we're petitioning for something, and well, what's even just regular public nuisance codes? We have to explain to them what they are, why cities have them. I'm like, dude, you're a judge, and so I remember sitting in a courtroom with Amanda Pope, and we're in the back and we go to the chambers and we're like actually teaching the judge on what we're doing, why we're doing it. And it was a pretty long, lengthy, I think we're there over an hour just educating them. And it's funny because I'm coming from the code perspective side and she's coming from the legal side, and we're just tag teaming it. And it was funny because you see this judge's eyes like, wow, I didn't know that. And I'm like, you're ruling on this in about an hour. So it's an interesting thing. So if you were to explain it, let's say if you were to explain a receivership, and I know this is tough to do because I always tell my so the way I explain it to like my kid, I don't know if you ever saw, I do TikToks with my 7-year-old. and sometimes I tend to explain things. And the way I explain things, when you see a very dilapidated house that could be a danger to himself or others, I say, look, sometimes like when people can't take care of their kids, the legal system assigns like a foster parent or to help them, to give guardianship and take whatever steps to give this person a healthy environment. Well, with receiverships, the way I explain to a lot of folks is sometimes what you do is these folks are incapable or unwilling to take care of their properties, and we have to petition for a receiver to take action and to remedy the home or to fix the home, and and then work the process, and then that person has legal control, I would say, to do the repairs and take loans or whatever for the best interests of the neighborhood and the community. So is that a fair assessment?
That is actually a perfect assessment. Yeah, I'm going to start using that. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's almost like appointing a foster. I've never heard it that way, but I think that's exactly right. Yeah, you're essentially a foster parent for a year or two until you get that property back on its feet. And a lot of times, sometimes there's these owners that honestly have like hoarder issues, and you kind of work with them to get back on track. Sometimes I said they're deceased or something, but no, I'm going to start using that. Actually, that's a great explanation. It is
Well,
like a foster parent. Yeah.
Ryan, you say, when individuals pass. So a lot of people like myself, you just think of it that way. And so, to speak to what Jennifer says, and again, good morning, Miss Morris. We appreciate your awesome comments as always, because I'm right down the line of this was my question. So she says, receiverships have been instrumental in closing down nuisance illegal dispensaries. We're now looking at doing it for a house that keeps the illegal cannabis grows. Communication with our city council has been key. So my question to you, Ryan, and thank you for that, Jennifer, was, can these receiverships be used for specific violations, nuisance violations? So again, kind of delving down into it, you have a municipality that's working with a particular nuisance issue. Is it ever a case where a receivership deals with the cannabis, but maybe not another nuisance portion of that? That's my question in all of this. Can it take care of everything? Or can it be pocketed off to take care of individual nuisances or violations?
Yeah, and just so you know, what I've specifically been talking about is health and safety receivership, but receivership is a hugely broad thing. Like, when Bernie Madoff his Ponzi scheme got there, a receiver was appointed to fix it.
Okay.
A receiver made Washington Mutual into Chase, so it's a massive remedy. We've been talking about health and safety receivership. And
Thank
then
you.
for cannabis grows, there's like the Drug Abatement Act, which you can use to then appoint a receiver, even if the property is looks okay, but it's an illegal drug house. You can do a Drug Abatement Act and then appoint a receiver and kind of fix the same problems. I typically see health and safety receiverships, but yes, you can do it to shut down a drug house.
Awesome. Thank you for touching on that. I'm learning so much today.
And then we focus, the main focus for us is on the code enforcement, the building code, because this is more specific for California, because California deals with a lot of health and safety codes, and many cities have similar health and safety codes, with receiverships, like you said, there's plenty of different areas. And one of the things that, that a lot of code officers don't realize that, a receiver it's I wouldn't say a nuclear option, but it's one of those last resorts where you tried the voluntary compliance, you tried the criminal route, and the person is definitely unwilling or unable to do it. And and you always take the human element into consideration when doing this, because you don't want to do a receiver on a little 90-year-old ladies on fixed income. You really want to take steps to find assistance for them first, but when it comes to some of the receiverships, like in a hoarding case, a lot of these folks will, the place has been so run down where, you have to present, because it normally is a council action, correct? So a lot of times it goes through like a closed session where you have to present why, well, not you, but the city attorney or city prosecutor presents why we're going into this realm of receiverships. And you council has to decide to use the resource and say, yes, the city is going to take that action and then petition for a receiver such as yourself.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, yeah, it honestly, it is kind of the nuclear option. It's kind of the last resort. You don't do it just issue one citation and say, hey, they didn't respond in 3 days. Like, you want to be sure because it's an extreme remedy. I mean, basically, you're going to be taking over someone's property and possibly selling it, and you have to figure out where that person's going to go. It is not just like, oh, receiver every time someone doesn't respond to one code citation. Like I mean, in Vallejo, when we were doing the neighborhood law program, we came up with a system of like, okay, if they get 5 citations over a period of a year or 2 years, I'm sorry, then it was like, okay, I mean, this isn't working. Because, even 1, 2 citations, and you need to go to the court and you present like a packet of, hey, everything we did. And it's a high burden to prove that a receiver is necessary. So, and I think I do call it the nuclear option. It is the option of last resort, and you don't want to have to do it. And specifically, if it's like a 90-year-old lady that's a hoarder, I mean, you really want to be careful because, you can do it, but there's obviously going to be some scrutiny over that,
Sure, makes sense. So thank you for breaking down the, essentially the many ways that a receivership can be effective, especially for individuals like me who we hear the words, like we talked about before, we know Amanda Pope, we've had her on the show, but it's just not something that's utilized out here in Colorado very much. After the first time we did a little bit of information on this very topic, I did a lot of research. And that's why I always put that disclaimer that we need to remember that our show reaches a lot of people, and that making sure that you know what your codes are, what your counsel intent is, but then being able to bring this document or this piece of paper, such as an article like you had mentioned, Ryan, forth to your attorneys or individuals who are those key players in making these, necessary partnerships happen with receiverships in municipalities. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things also that I want to kind of cover. So you wrote an article. It was a good article, and you talked about these different, like the Drug Abatement Act, the Red Light District Act, eminent domain. Can you kind of explain to the viewer a little bit what these are? What is a Drug Abatement Act? Because you did mention it earlier. So what is a Drug Abatement Act?
So drug abatement, and again, these are mostly California laws. I don't know I imagine similar laws are in different counties, but in California, the Drug Abatement Act is if you can prove it's a house that's storing drugs that are illegal, you can get a $25,000 fine and order the property to be boarded up for a year. But in my experience, you might also want to add a receiver, because just leaving a boarded up property isn't going to do all that much. You can add a receiver to maybe sell the property on top of it. But it's just a situation where the drug abatement, it's just a drug house like that other commenter had, saying exactly what that situation was. Even if the property's in good shape, like externally, it wouldn't be a health and safety receivership, but you can do a Drug Abatement Act, get it declared a nuisance, and appoint a receiver. And then the Red Light Abatement Act, it's for, prostitution. A way we've been appointed over receivers in this several times is like a house is operating a casino in their neighborhood, and all kinds of fights. It's not actually legal in California at all, but certainly not in a house. And then you have 50 people getting drunk till 4 a.m, gambling, all this different stuff. And that's a Red Light Abatement Act. Again, the property might actually look in decent shape, but red light abatement, it's red light district, that kind of thing. It's gambling, prostitution. You can take it over the same way to fix it. If it's a prostitution house, you can use it on like illegal massage parlors or hotels that are really suspect. That's what the Red Light Abatement Act's for. So there's the health and safety receivership, which is just a completely dilapidated property. Just driving by it, you're like, wow, that is a mess. Drug abatement might look okay, but the police are going there all the time because people are getting drugs from there. Red light abatement, I think the most common one I see is casinos. It run from a house, but those are the 3 kind of acts.
And one of the tools that we always say, you have to have a good partnership with your police departments. I think we in certain jurisdictions I've served in, what we did is we were always named on the warrant, and a lot of times you went with the special investigation units that were doing the the slap houses, the casino houses, the prostitution houses, and they seem like like normal houses. And and what happens for a lot of these properties, the police, the police would go and arrest all the bad players, and then and then they would come back. And one of the things I always, when I have these conversations with chiefs of police, I was like, hey, police normally are good at handling the bees. Let us handle the hive. Let us do this. So it's a longer term solution, because no hive, the bees aren't going to come back. So and using these tools like the Red Light District Abatement Act, or the Drug Abatement Act, I was talking to one of these attorneys, Matt Silver, and we talked about about the scarlet letter approach, where you put it's a drug house in front of the no one is to be here because it's a drug house, no one's to be, please call the police if you notice. And those are awesome tools that people use all the time. So in your experience, and giving presentations to to lawyers and legislators, the California League of Cities, and writing articles on how other states can use health and safety receivers, what is something that you tend to point out to them that they may not be aware of?
Well, I think you make a good point, and I kind of learned this the first time. Like, yeah, you do need to have the support of police on a lot of this, because like I remember I got my first like receivership order, and then I was kind of like, okay, what now? I mean, I needed police to go clear the house. The receiver was there ready to board it up and do everything, but I was just 2 weeks out of law school, and I kind of told the police what to do. They weren't too happy. I learned how to like be a little more understanding of the police. It wasn't a good approach. I was like, hey, I got this order, let's go to the house today. And they're like, we have other stuff to do, and we don't know what you're talking about or anything. And so I think it's important. I think it's one of the good things about receivership is it can kind of help all the different departments work together, but you have to explain it. And I just went in being like, oh, here I am, I got this court order, let's listen to me, because I'm a lawyer. And that is a terrible approach, but that's what I did. I eventually learned what to do and explained it all, and we had a great relationship. But it took some time to explain to everyone what was going to happen, and you also wanted to see results, because they didn't want to just go kick a bunch of people out and do the same thing over and over. So we had to coordinate it, and yeah, eventually that worked out. But and I thought that you were giving some good examples. The Bee in the Hive is also a good one, because that's also the problem. I mean, police can keep going and going and going and arresting the same people, but yeah, receivership, basically, instead of calling the cops, the receiver is responsible for securing the property. We will have like security come by, or we'll use special board up stuff, and we'll check the property every day ourselves to make sure that the police don't have to get called.
And one of the things that we do, what I do tell code officers is, if there's a receiver appointed, guess what? They are the legal guardian of that property. So guess what? Mr. Ryan Griffith is responsible for that property. So if there's issues there, I need to let Ryan know, say, hey, there's these issues there, you need to fix them, because you, sir, are now responsible for this property. And just because, sometimes what I notice is, receivers do take over properties, and they list, there's stuff that you find after you start to clean up, and you start finding other stuff, and a code officer needs to call those out, because if not, then sometimes they don't get fixed or addressed in a timely manner. So, one of the things we say is like, hey, maybe I need a letter of trespass. So if somebody's trespassing, I need the police to come and arrest those folks. So you, guardian, I need a letter of trespass submitted to the police department, or I need you to register this property as a vacant property. Whatever the case may be, I always advise code officers, hey, work with the receiver, because they are now the person that has been court assigned to oversee this property. And and I know some receivers don't really like that, but we have to take care of the best interests of the property. Now, the other thing I always recommend to any code officer when you're dealing with these problem properties where it's gambling, don't go out there by yourself. Don't go out there alone. Always have police with you first. People talk about like, officer safety. Oh, we have to have this and that. I'm like, you know what? First thing you need to do is contact your law enforcement who's properly equipped. Just kind of, so what happened to you in your first 2 weeks of law school doesn't happen to them. It's so important for you to have the right people there. I never have my code officers serve a warrant. I always have the police clear the house and do whatever they need to do before we even step anywhere near the home. You know, we're not equipped. We're not properly suited for those kind of issues. So, you know, because sometimes you guys go there and you have squatters inside, or, you know, I had a code officer that, you know, was terminated because they started a demo of the property and there was somebody sleeping in the crawl space, you know, which wasn't cleared out. So yeah, so it became an issue. So is there any other things you see as a receiver that you know, that kind of 101 that you would say, hey, this is something that you may want to look at? And Rachel, sorry I took up the little time, but feel free to ask all these questions because I know you have a million of them. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to say, no, that's also a great point. I think even once a receiver is appointed, I still think there's a lot of, I mean, once cities do several, I think they kind of get the process. But the first few, it's kind of like, oh, who is the receiver? And yeah, like you said, we're the foster parent. And yeah, we do want to know if there's a problem. Like, call us and tell us, because we'd rather fix it ASAP than wait for it to be 2 weeks. And then we're like, oh, there's been squatters in there ripping all the electricity we just built, just installed. We want to know as soon as possible. And we also try to tell the, you know, because usually these code enforcement cases get initiated by neighbors, and we try to tell the neighbors, like, hey, call us. We're literally going to be more responsive and know more about this specific property than code is, and that saves code some time, and it also gets the message to us, because, you know, it's almost like if the neighbor calls code, then code's got other stuff to do, then call us. If they just call us directly, it's just a lot smoother process, you know. Kind of, it's almost gets to be a game of telephone if that isn't there. So I think that's a really good point, is tell the code officer and any neighbors what's happening. And we usually, when we get appointed, we go to the neighborhood and kind of explain what it is we're doing, introduce ourselves, tell them what's happening, because I think it's really important. And neighbors are always, they're great resources. They can help, because they obviously don't want that nuisance to come back. And if they can be our eyes and ears on the ground, that's really helpful, you know?
You know, Ryan, that actually brings me into a good segue into my question. So Pete had talked a lot about taking care of the best interest of the property, taking care of the best interest in the municipality, and so on and so forth. You made a good point. It's about those neighbors too, those individuals that are highly impacted by this situation every day. So when you're looking at it from that perspective and keeping all of those interests in mind, can you talk a little bit about the timeline to complete compliance at a high level view? You know, I have some additional questions in that, but I guess that'll be how I would like to start it is, you know, from the citizens' perspective, the ones who have to look at the nuisance every day, or the code officer's perspective, what are those high level timeframes? Understanding everything is different.
Great. Yeah, I think that's always, you know, how long is it going to take? That's a great question. And usually, you know, when a receiver is first appointed, I mean, obviously we're not going to fix everything in a day, but usually there's junk piled up everywhere. There's often people living. In the first week, we'll do the basic cosmetic, like haul the trash out, get the people cleared out, and then, you know, if it really needs repairs, because sometimes once you clear all that out, it actually doesn't look that bad, and then you can kind of sell it as is. But if real repairs need to be done, it'd probably take about a year and a half. So I'd say these cases, obviously there's exceptions, but take between like 8 to 16 months, but from the time the receiver is appointed to it being, you know, closed out. It can be longer, of course, but I'd say a year, maybe year and a half is the common. If it's 8 months, we've done it that fast. That's fast, but yeah, I'd say generally a year is the most common thing from appointment to properties completely fixed, you know?
Closing out a case. Okay. But like you said, that doesn't necessarily entail the blight nuisances, the things that the individuals are looking at every day. It sounds like, you know, those are first priority, almost dealt with immediately. And then it's just a continued, you know, legal process, paperwork process is kind of what I'm assuming to that.
Yeah. And, you know, if you're more often than not, these properties get sold, and, you know, just, you know, there's escrow, there's getting just, you know, even that, finding a buyer, all just selling the house can take several months, even if it's completely abated. I mean, by that point, the neighbors are pretty happy. There's a for sale sign out, and it's all cleaned up. Nobody particularly cares anymore, but it needs to get sold, and so it doesn't resurface.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Rachel, that for folks to understand, especially, it's not like a real quick remedy, because even getting a follow-up appointment or a progress report to the court, it can take months to get an appointment. And, in the meantime, sometimes they can't proceed until they get the okay to like spend more funds, or, so it happens. And, for a lot of these properties, I mean, they've been nuisances for like 20 years. And then, the city decided, hey, we're going to go this route. And, a year doesn't seem like a long time. I mean, especially when you're seeing progress, it's good, and to the credit to most receivers, they always tend to do the outside ugly stuff first before they, because it's more, you can see that the impact that's what's going on. And it really gives that faith back to the neighborhood, saying, hey, the city's actually doing something about it. And, one thing I always tell folks, just because it goes into receivership, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be sold to a person, because if that person can afford to pay it, guess what? They can pay it, and, they're still the owner. And unfortunately, when that happens, sometimes it goes back to the same place. But luckily, there's remedies to say, hey, it needs to stay clean within the next 18 months, or, so the receivership doesn't really close out. Am I correct, Ryan?
Oh, that can happen. I know sometimes that has happened. It's never happened to us, because usually if the owner's done it, we're kind of like, we don't want this to resurface. We even have a case where like one of the stipulations was they have to have the right of first refusal. The current owner does, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, they might end up rebuying it, but obviously it's not an ideal situation if they let it.
Yeah.
If it's like to be honest, if it's like an elderly person that just let things get out of control, maybe that's a good situation to let them repurchase it and maybe have like a caretaker monitor it. If it's kind of like a slumlord person, then you don't want to sell it back to them.
Right.
So.
No. I think these are all great tools, and remembering which one is going to be the best for your overall remedy. And what I'm hearing with all of this, whether it's Pete saying it or whether it's you, Ryan, is, these are lasting impacts that we're creating on the community. They may not be immediate remedies, but it sure, is something that you guys try for. But knowing that these exist and that they're able to be used, these necessary steps is awesome. And having these partners out there like yourselves, who, you said it, I know I wrote it down somewhere in my giant list of notes, but thank you for caring, because I think you're every code officer's dream come true, in the sense that you do care. Oddly, sometimes I wonder why you guys care. But you do, and ultimately you're helping us. So like Pete had mentioned, you're doing something for the municipality, but you're also doing something for that individual code enforcement officer who has worked tirelessly in that neighborhood to try to make lasting change. You're that saving grace for them too, to be able to say, hey, look, we found a resource, and this resource isn't necessarily going to come in and provide immediate change in some senses, but it's going to be a lasting impact that creates quality of life. And isn't that what we're all about, is creating, enhancing, and impacting quality of life? So thank you for caring, Ryan. I appreciate that comment that you made earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, I do care, and I honestly think it's one of the most important functions that cities, counties do, is because I mean, like most people don't care about a police or fire union contract. I mean, sure they care, but if I mean, we've all had a bad roommate, which is annoying, but if you have a house that's like a crack house next to you and you can't enjoy your life because this is happening, I mean, it's horrible. I mean, we see it all the time. And then I know those code enforcement officers are getting yelled at to do something, and they've done everything. They've literally done everything they can do.
Right.
They just kind of need these legal remedies to get it across the finish line to fix their work. I just think that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's why I think these neighborhood law programs and just more collaboration between city attorneys and code enforcement officers need to happen, because I think if people understood it better, I think a lot of progress would get made on both fronts, and a lot of good could be done.
Yeah, that's
Now, here,
exactly what Pete and I do what we do, educating the public, making them aware of the whys of what we do so that they ultimately want to do it themselves and then continue that education. Sorry, Pete, didn't mean to interrupt you.
oh no, it's all good. So we had a comment from Matt Cozyline here, who's a very awesome, loyal viewer, and he says he didn't know about the option the first years of his career. I'm the same way. I didn't know about this option. Now, one thing about Matt, great guy, and he does harbor enforcement. Have you ever had to do a receivership at at sea? I'm like,
Let's see.
it's crazy because I went out with him to kind of peruse what the harbor enforcement was about. He let me drive the boat. I almost crashed it into a pier. Sorry, Matt. But have you ever had to deal with receivership on a boat? And if so, does something like that exist?
I never have. Like I said, receivership can be on all kinds of things. I'm sure if there was like a harbor situation or a boat that was completely out of control, you could seize it. I mean, that gets into maritime law. There might be some other things I don't know. But in essence, like I said, receivership can be like Bernie Madoff. It's really just for a situation that's out of control and the court needs to fix it. That's just the basic summary. And it can come in a variety of ways, whether it be a boat, a drug house, a Ponzi scheme, any of those things. If it's out of control and we don't know what to do, a receiver is appointed and can fix it. So I think it could apply to a boat situation. I've never done it, but I imagine it would. Yeah.
There's another niche for you there. Right?
Yeah, I guess so.
He was just going to ask the same question. I went in there, with Matt and thinking it was like, barnacle enforcement. And like he showed me a whole different other world. And I was like so impressed. And kudos to that group and anybody that does any type of harbor enforcement. I don't know if there's lake enforcement in Colorado, Rachel.
Park rangers.
Park rangers. So yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But yeah. So sorry, I kind of deviated. So go ahead and ask.
No. I just won't try to drive the boat. I know myself. I would have crashed it. So not intentionally, but.
This is a great topic because, in California, it sounds like it's used a lot. And I think here in Colorado, it can be used. And I'm sure there's some municipalities that have effectively used it. We talked a little bit when Amanda was on, I think we come up with other solutions because if it hasn't affected you or if you haven't implemented this particular program in your municipality, you don't know it exists. So you create other things. I know for myself in one of my jurisdictions, we created a blighted nuisance property rehabilitation code, which is extremely similar, but it's done at the municipal level through administrative hearings. So it's about what's going to work for your jurisdiction, but just because it's not being done in your jurisdiction doesn't mean it can't be done in your jurisdiction. And Ryan is instrumental in making those type of things happen. And I think that, and I'm sorry, Ryan, because I'm going to put you out there and hopefully Pete will put your contact information up, but I truly believe you are an incredible resource to our profession because not only, number one, do you care, but you have that knowledge base on not only how to run a program like this, but how to get started with a program like this and looking at it as big picture, not just, okay, it's a document. A receivership is a document and a process, but through these neighborhood law programs, I think we get a better understanding of being able to utilize these programs to their highest extent. So definitely want to check that out. I would really encourage other individuals. Can you talk a little bit? I know you and Pete might have touched on it, but can you talk a little bit about that article and about those creating those programs where they don't necessarily exist? Sorry, that was a long question for you.
No. And yeah, like I said, I think I'm kind of unique because I've been on the city side and the receiver side. I don't know. I've been in it and I've made mistakes when in the city side. Like I said, just that first thing of like bossing the police department around when you're 2 weeks into the job is not a smart decision. Like, don't do that. It made perfect sense to me at the time, but I ended up building it from the ground up, and I learned I made a lot of mistakes that I learned from, and like, okay, like this is what you need to do, and you do, and like you said, just a technical approach of here is the legal document. There's a lot of moving parts that you need to use to actually make this effective. You can have, all the pieces of paper in the world. What good is it going to do? And so as for the article in the neighborhood law program, could you repeat the question one more time, just so I
Oh, it was all over the place, Ryan. I can't believe you can't figure it out and remember it. It was all over the place. No, really, I mean, ultimately what my point is that you've created so much more than just a process, and helping with that process, and with your articles out there, and getting municipalities that don't have this particular process in place. Aside from handing them your article, or aside from pulling a bunch of research off the web, what's the number one thing that we can do to get our municipalities on board with these neighborhood law programs and receiverships?
So, I mean, I think explaining it, I'd be happy to explain it. And then I think there's maybe working with maybe local law schools that want to, and I think that's also an important thing, is telling young lawyers that even this, I had no idea what code enforcement was when I was in law school, to be perfectly honest. I didn't even know. And kind of just, and I think honestly, most people don't even know what code enforcement is. I mean, they just really don't. I mean, we know, but most people just don't know it exists, or maybe they've heard of code enforcement but don't know what it means. And then you start getting these things together, and you want to get a neighborhood law program and say, hey, because I do have the document that got hired, like the city attorney in Vallejo put forth a proposal to the city council to create a neighborhood law program. And I'd be happy to share that, because it kind of explains what it's going to be. And in essence, it's kind of what it really says is we need more collaboration between code enforcement and the city attorney's office. Our other city attorneys are swamped. We are literally in bankruptcy. We can't figure this out, but we need 2 young lawyers that will pay a lot. I mean, I made a lot less than I probably should have starting out, but it was a great experience, so it was all worth it. And it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. So I think that document is helpful in just really explaining, like, hey, there's a if there is, I mean, hopefully there isn't, but I think that is a real common thing I see, is where the code and city attorneys are just very not connected. And then, a lot of cities have outside counsel city attorneys, not even in-house. And so then that's even a further disconnect, because it's like they're at some firm, they don't even know who the person is. And I think code enforcement officers don't even know that what's really going on. Again, there's plenty of good relationships, but I think just really explaining that disconnect and how helpful it can be, because you can literally fix these properties and you even make money. It doesn't cost anything to do a receivership for the city. In fact, they get money back. I mean, I think I made over like $1 million for the city of Vallejo, which when you're a bankrupt city is nice, So
Yeah.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, we talk about educating the public, we talk about educating kids, we talk about all these avenues for educating individuals on code enforcement. And, I just kind of had an aha moment. One of my mottos is connecting the community through code enforcement, which should be everybody's. I mean, it's super dorky, but it sounds like there's additional ways that we can continue to connect, whether that's in these settings, individuals who are going to potentially work with and in conjunction with code enforcement officers. So I'm seeing ideas all over the place. I've got my whole paper going here with notes, about how we can continue those partnerships. So thank you, Ryan.
no problem. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's just overall good for people to know what it is, because I was even thinking about this. A lot of times, a lot of fires, crime, all this stuff happens, but if code enforcement is running as it should, it's almost like catching cancer early. Instead, the police and the fire, almost like chemo, it's a huge step, and it's like, well, the property's on fire now. We could have maybe prevented this had we worked together, and then saved everybody a lot of time, maybe even saved lives had we dealt with it early on.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And that's a lot of what code enforcement is trying to deal with things on the front end so that the impact on the back end is positive and not, maintenance nightmares or whatever have you. So
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of just, you see it all the time, because once it's occupied by squatters and there's drugs and then it's like something really bad happens, and then all of a sudden it becomes a priority. But had it been operating efficiently, none of that would have needed to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we make a bunch of you, Ryan, and put you everywhere, sorry, Pete. We can make a bunch of Ryans.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't hear anything.
Oh
I'm
no, sorry. No, we're both talking. So sorry. So no, I was just saying in your article, the perfect example that you gave was Ghost Ship. That
Yep.
was a perfect example of cities waiting too long to take action, and then something happens. It's similar to what you and Rachel were discussing.
Yeah, exactly. And I bring that example up a lot. I mean, I know, this was like a nationwide show, and a lot of people, even in the Bay Area, don't remember Ghost Ship. But yeah, it was a kind of a party warehouse in Oakland, and people just partied there. 20-year-old kids, kind of doing drugs, like rave type stuff, and the city kept issuing notices saying like, hey, this is really dangerous, something bad's gonna happen. And then eventually it did. Like, really sadly, I think it was like 40 people just burned alive because they got jammed in there. A fire happened, and it was awful, and everyone knew something was going to happen, and that would have been a perfect example for a receivership because all the documentation was there. And sadly, a bunch of people died, and then I think Oakland had to pay $30 million in settlement or something like that. And it could have all been avoided had they just worked more collaboratively with code enforcement. And these things, and I'm not trying to like knock Oakland. I mean, this kind of thing happens all the time. It just happened to be a really tragic event,
Yep. We utilize those tragic events to move forward with, new policies, new codes, new laws, you name it.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a question, Rachel? Because I know you kind of like were talking. And
no, I apologize. I was saying we need a bunch of little yous, Ryan, everywhere. Individuals like you who have that passion and that drive and that desire to do more. Because essentially, as us as code enforcement officers or myself, we're looking to create lasting impact, lasting collaboration and effects on the community. And you're doing the same thing in a different fashion. So I think it's awesome. We've had a lot of great comments today. I think a lot of people really appreciate hearing different perspectives about these programs out there. We had one say, collaborative relationships are so paramount to the success of code departments. And I think that that's what we talk about on a daily basis, whether we're teaching it, connectivity and code enforcement, whether we're teaching communication, leadership, whatever have you, all of that stems around, communication and success of those relationships. So knowing that you're another piece to the puzzle and that you're a positive piece to the puzzle is super important to have that tool. So again, thank you from my perspective.
Yeah, and I do think code enforcement is a collaborative thing. I mean, and without the help of attorneys, everyone needs to work together in a city. And I know a lot of times people almost it just happens, not just in cities and every organization everywhere. Everyone gets into kind of a silo. And I also think that's one of the best things about the neighborhood law programs is kind of like the attorneys kind of work with all the departments because there's fire prevention, there's cops, they all kind of want to fix these problems, but they don't, and they can get to 90% of the work they do is all because it just needs that lawyer to get it across the finish line. And then people see a real positive difference. Because if a police officer keeps going to the same house over and over and over, that's got to be frustrating. Same with a code officer, or if a fire is happening at the same property every month. I mean, all the documentation they have is crucial for the lawyer to get the receiver appointed. But it's like I would imagine it being very frustrating to just do that and just be like, well, I'm going to write another report and be back here in a few weeks. It's got to be very demoralizing, but the neighborhood law programs allow that attorney to take it across the finish line. And it probably makes you feel a lot better about your work because you see it being used and actually fixing the property,
Yeah.
So one of the things I know, we didn't get into it, but always talking about these seedy motels and how, that's such another topic for another day. But there's a lot of communities dealing with that, especially right now. There's I wasn't like in the 80s we had the crack epidemic, and now we have the meth. We have meth. It looks like Walking Dead in some of these communities, and sometimes the hotels are like the hub of it's like it's like the Justice League layer for them, and it's crazy because you see some bad stuff coming out of there. You see children, parents with children doing drugs, and that's another topic for another day. So, but before we sign off, what are some when I first started doing receiverships with, different attorneys and different receivers, so one of the misconceptions that they're too costly, they take too long. And, I always tell folks, look, there's mechanisms in there for cost recovery. The time that the police are out there, the code officer, fire department, whoever goes out there, there's always, but you have to document all that stuff in order for the receiver to petition for reimbursement of those costs. So, one of the things that I always, really relate to code enforcement officers, please, keep those logs, make sure you account when it's a receivership process, account for that time, because if you're going out there, you're using the money to drive there. I mean, that's an expense. The time you're there, maybe you're with two officers for officer safety reasons. Maybe the police department came over there. So make sure you get a good account balance, and that includes fringe benefits. Make sure, because this person, but by the lack of fixing their property, they're causing you, the other taxpayers, to pay to use city resources, and the law does allow for you to recoup some of those costs. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, I think the other that's spot on. You want to document your time, and you do get reimbursed for the time and everything. And then the other thing is, like, you don't pay the receiver. The receivership gets paid from the property. I mean, you can't pay the receiver, even if you. Maybe there's some crazy exception, but essentially, a receiver is the judge, and you can't pay a judge. So essentially, and that's, I think, a really important thing to know is, like, the receiver takes the financial risk of making it work with the property and all this stuff. The city does not pay us, and I think that's a really important thing to know. So in essence, it takes time and resources to get a receiver appointed, but as far as actually paying the receiver, you don't do it. And you should document your time, because you can get money back once everything's done. But if you don't have the documented time, you can't just say, oh yeah, it was $50,000. Why not? You have to document it. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like some success too. Sorry, Pete. Ryan, it sounds like you've had some success too, reading your article about utilizing those funds to create and maintain some of these neighborhood law programs. So it kind of goes.
We kind of, the one in Vallejo, I mean, it's still going, 10 years later, which is cool. And it's almost self-sufficient on what it makes. It's a rare program that actually makes more money than it costs. So that's a real positive, and city council loves that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be awesome and beneficial for our viewers to be able to see that article too, if we're able to put that up there, Pete.
I'll look for it. I should have it here, and I have a link for it. And let me get that link. It's okay with you if we share that article, Ryan?
Oh, of course, yeah.
I'm hoping so. It's in the Los Angeles and San Francisco Daily Journal, so I'd be pretty proud.
Yeah. And I've written some stuff for the League of Cities too, and of California League of Cities. I'll post that too.
So Ryan, are you good with, we talk to a lot of individuals, and again, we try to touch many from around the world. Are you good with being a resource if some individuals ever do want to reach out to you and have some additional questions?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a huge nerd about this stuff, so I love talking about it.
That. I love that. Huge nerd. So
yeah.
Pete did put your information in the chat. So please do take a look at that. And it's R Griffith, GRIFFITH at BayAreaRG.com. That's correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. And we're with Bay Area Receivership Group is the company. But yeah, I see it right there.
Perfect.
That's me.
I think it's great, having these resources. I'm just going to keep interrupting you all afternoon, Pete, if that's good. So I think it's great having these resources and not only being able to see you on the screen and hear what you have to say, but have somebody that you can connect with offline as well. So thank you for allowing that for our viewers and myself. Sorry, Pete,
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, Ryan, if you can send me the article, like a link to the article, because I do have the article here and I can download it, but it's not allowing me to, it's not an actual link. It's a document. So what I'll do is I will try to, there it is. I will go.
This is the League of Cities article, I think.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me see. You're on there. Let me copy it. Boom.
I think it's just helpful for everybody to have these resources.
And this
Yeah.
was one me and Amanda actually wrote together. That's a little different, but it was for the League of Cities.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen.
No problem.
Cool. And here, I know nobody's going to be able to write this down, so it's in the chat. So when you go rewatch the show, it should be in the chat. You go ahead and click on it, and you'll be able to see the articles. And also, there's some resources at the Bay Area Receiver website. If you go to our team and look up Ryan, you'll see a list of articles that he has under his profile. So. Great stuff. And thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to see you. Oh, smiley guy. You know, for you guys, when I stand next to Ryan, Ryan is like this.
Yeah, I'm 6'7". Yeah, so I'm a tall guy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the tallest receiver I ever seen.
Yeah,
And
it might
he's
be.
not a football receiver. He's a law receiver.
Yeah.
So, big guy.
Cross for tight end, but
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. And Rachel, can you lead us out, please?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Jennifer, Ryan, Matt, everybody who came on and gave us their time. It's amazing to be with individuals who share the same passion for delivering the best quality service and you name it. So again, Mr. Griffith, thank you for being here with us today. Pete, thank you. Enjoy your Friday, enjoy your weekend, and we will see you next time.
all right, take care. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.